So now we're going to have a look at what's going to happen when two countries open up to trade. We are considering the US and the rest of the world. We are assuming that they're producing only two goods, wheat and cloth. Let's start with a position of autarky, where there is no trade going on. We have the US producing at point S0, and we have the rest of the world producing at point S0. You might notice that the US production possibility frontier is skewed somewhat towards wheat. That's because the US has comparative advantage in wheat. You might also notice that the rest of the world has a PPF skewed somewhat towards cloth. That's because the rest of the world has a comparative advantage in cloth. We can actually show this using the numbers given to us here. Recall that the slope of the price line is the price of whatever is on the x-axis. So here, the price of cloth in the US is 2 units of wheat given up to produce 1 unit of cloth. In the rest of the world, the opportunity cost of producing cloth is only 0.67 units of wheat given up to produce 1 cloth. So who has the lower opportunity cost? The rest of the world. Therefore, the rest of the world has comparative advantage in producing cloth, whereas the US has comparative advantage in producing wheat. Before trade, the country is consuming where it is producing. It can only consume what it makes. So the consumption point C0 is at the same point as S0. And the highest community indifference curve we can touch is I0. Same thing here. We're consuming where we are producing, and we can touch the indifference curve of I0. What happens when we open up to trade? As in the previous example in Module 1, the rest of the world is going to export cloth to the US. The demand for cloth in the rest of the world will increase because it's exporting more of it to the US. Whereas the supply of cloth in the rest of the world will increase here and force down the price. An increase in demand for cloth increases the price of cloth. An increase of the supply of cloth decreases the price of cloth. The world price is then going to fall somewhere between the domestic prices. It's going to be less than 2 wheat per cloth, but more than 0.67 wheat per cloth. So it's going to go up here and it's going to go down here, and they're going to converge at 1 world price. Now let's assume this world price is 1 wheat per cloth. In any assignment or test or anything you have to do for this course, this world price will be given to you, so you don't have to derive it. So I'm giving you now the world price as 1 wheat per cloth. Now, given that the US is importing cloth from the rest of the world and exporting wheat, after trade it's going to produce more wheat. So it's now going to produce at S1 towards wheat, whereas the rest of the world is going to produce more cloth because it's exporting it. So it's going to produce at S1 here. At this new production point, they're going to trade at the world price. Remember, the slope of a line here is going to be the price of whatever's on the x-axis. So we're going to have a new price line, a new slope, and therefore a new world price for cloth. Now, we've already said that the new world price is 1 wheat per cloth. So the slope of this line is 1 wheat per cloth. You might be interested in noting that because the price of cloth is going up in the rest of the world, you can see that the slope of this line is getting steeper. Whereas because the price of cloth is decreasing in the US as they get more supply, the slope of the line is getting flatter. Now, there's one more element that we haven't considered, consumption. The US is importing cloth from the rest of the world. So in relation to cloth, it can actually consume outside of its production possibility frontier. So it can consume somewhere like C1. Here. So if it consumes outside its PPF towards cloth, it can now reach a higher indifference curve at I1 and be generally better off because they can consume more than they can themselves produce. By the same token, the rest of the world is importing wheat, so it can now consume outside of its PPF relative to wheat. So its C1, point C1 will be here. Again, it can also reach a higher indifference curve at I1. This could be the end of the analysis, but we can extend it a little bit by considering the market for cloth in each economy. So we bring down this cloth here, and we make this the price, and this now becomes the market for cloth in the US, and the market for cloth in the rest of the world. Now, the world price for cloth, as we've established, is 1. The domestic price for cloth in the rest of the world used to be 0.67. And the domestic price for cloth in the US used to be 2. So now what we can do is we can actually plot these markets based on the prices and based on some of the points here. The points that you need to consider are S1 and C1. So to draw the graphs, you need to bring them down as follows. So we've brought down S1 and C1. Now, where was the domestic equilibrium in the rest of the world for cloth? Well, the domestic price was 0.67. So this has to be our equilibrium. The only thing is that our demand and supply have to cross through these points. So as follows. So this is the domestic demand and domestic supply. Now, this amount here, the surplus at the world price, is the exports. This is mirrored by the trade triangle here, where this is the amount of the exports as well. Let's go over to the US. In the US, in the domestic market, the price was 2. So we have to make this the equilibrium and travel through these points with our curves as follows. And at the world price, we now have a deficit, which is the amount of our imports. And these are shown equally here. So what we can see by drawing these two markets is that the rest of the world is exporting cloth of this amount on the bottom of the trade triangle, and that the US is importing cloth of this amount, as can be read from the trade triangle as well.